Well, let's talk now to Mark Cancian, retired U.S. Marine Colonel and Senior Advisor at Washington Center for Strategic and International Studies. Mark, welcome back. We're just reporting on the latest chapter in the battle for Bakhmut, increasingly a focus of this war. Why is Bakhmut so important?
Bakhmut achieved an importance because there was so much focus on it. The Russians have been attacking there really for 6 or 7 months. The Ukrainian troops were quite exposed. They were in a salient. The Russians were trying to pinch that off. If they had succeeded, it would have been a major success. They failed. But then after months and months of attacks, both sides were pouring in troops, and the city got a significance beyond its strategic value. Like Verdun in the First World War or Stalingrad in the Second World War, it became a symbol of resistance and of attack.
Ukraine says it shot down all 36 drones launched by Russia overnight. Why has Moscow intensified its air campaign on Kyiv?
I think Moscow is trying to put pressure on the government and the people in advance of the counteroffensive that's widely expected. They're trying to discourage Ukraine from the counteroffensive, maybe undermine some of the civilian morale. Their attacks on the infrastructure were gaining some traction, but then the Ukrainians were able to mitigate that damage. So this is a new phase of the Russian air attack.
In terms of the wider Russian campaign, what insights can we gather when it comes to the events of the last few days? Where are we on the Russian campaign?
Well, the Battle of Bakhmut is over. The Russians have run out of combat power. We just heard that Wagner's pulling its forces back. There are small attacks by the Ukrainians, which have been important just because the Ukrainians have been able to go over the offensive, but this is not their counteroffensive. Emphasis now shifts to the Ukrainian counteroffensive, which is widely expected. The Ukrainians have built 8 or 9 brigades with the equipment supplied from NATO in the West. When they launch those, it'll be an important step in the war. The hope is that they will be able to have a major success, recapture significant territory. They won't be able to drive the Russians out of all of the occupied territory, but the hope is that they will make a significant step towards doing that.
Mark, when we first started talking all those months ago, and we've talked every few weeks about this war, we kept on referring to a spring offensive. Well, we're in June next week. What is the significance of this offensive not happening in the spring? Does it make any difference these days in modern warfare?
It doesn't really make a difference. The longer the timeline goes on, the more equipment and more training that the Ukrainians have. At some point, there's going to be some discomfort about delay. I mean, the Ukrainian people will start getting anxious, and supporters in the West will start getting anxious. You're going to start seeing some criticism of Ukraine. But in the near term, the Ukrainians are getting stronger. Now, the flip side is that the Russians are also digging in. So both sides are getting stronger. It's likely the Ukrainians are progressing at a greater rate, but they can't delay too long, or their people and their supporters are going to get anxious.
We talked about Russian tactics earlier on. Let me ask you about the wider picture of the war. How far are we into this? I mean, are we simply at the beginning or at the beginning of the end? How do you see this?
Well, we're likely in the middle. You know, there was the initial offensive phase by the Russians, and there's been this long stalemate, battle of attrition. Both sides have had great losses, but the front lines haven't moved a whole lot. The Ukrainians did have some success back in the fall, but not since then. The next big event is going to be this counteroffensive, and that will give us an indication about what the rest of the war looks like. If it's successful, then it may be the first step on a road towards Ukrainian victory. If it fails, if it gets hung up on the Russian front lines, then we're looking at maybe a different outcome of the war, maybe something negotiated.
Mark, good to see you again. Thanks for coming on the programme. Mark Cancian, U.S. Marine Colonel and Senior Advisor at Washington Center for Strategic and International Studies.